Hi and welcome to Dynamics Update. Today we are doing a bit of a special episode, and with me as usual I have Gustav Sundblad. Hello Gustav.
Hello Johan. How are you tonight?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. It's late and I'm a bit tired, so that's good.
Perfect time to talk about our favorite topic.
Yes, absolutely. So today is a bit of a special episode, as I mentioned. It's not an interview, but we are going to talk a bit about microservices and what they are, how they work, why they exist, and which ones are available.
Which ones should you use? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I think microservices is like the word in itself has gone up and down. A number of years back, everyone wanted to run everything on a microservice. Everything should be microservices. I think maybe we should start with kind of a explanation of what it is. I mean, and of course, from a Dynamics perspective, this is all coming from all of the different add-ins that are now available in Dynamics and the scale units, etc. So maybe we should just clarify, Johan, what is a microservice for you?
Yeah, so if we look at it from an AX perspective, I would say that AX 2012 is the opposite of a microservice. It's a very monolithic application. It's a big application. It requires it has a lot of dependencies. It has a lot of internal tables that are being used in different places, and it's a bit of a hassle to maintain, because if you change something over here, it might break things over there. So that is a monolithic application. That is the opposite of a microservice. So the point of a microservice is actually to break the chain of dependencies and create extremely well documented APIs and dependencies between these different links in the chain. So for instance, when you are working with event-based integrations, that is a way that you create these API dependencies instead of integrations, complicated integrations. Meaning that as long as you don't change the interface, you can basically do whatever updates you want on each of the components, as long as you don't change the interface between them.
Exactly, it's all about interface design, right? So, I mean, you could argue that AX 2012, more so than 2009 at least, worked with like interface design internally with the way it worked within the system. So, as long as we don't break the interface, then we can do whatever magic we want underneath the hood and return back the same contract, right? So, it's the same principle. It's just that microservices, they're not within the same application, usually, what you call something that resides outside of the system that you're currently running. How we look at it, at least. So a microservice, as you say, 2012 is like not a microservice. It's a monolithic application. 365 is in itself not a microservice, of course. It's quite monolithic, even though a lot of scalability and redundancy and secondary database, etc. So it's not in a bad way, but there is also another theme here, or name that comes up, is the scale units. Not to be confused, from my perspective at least, not to be confused with a microservice, because even though a scale unit, let's say the commerce scale unit, is another application, it's not Dynamics 365 like backend application, it's a different one. But it's not a microservice. It provides a set of operations, a set of logical operations, and works independently, mostly at least, but it's not really a microservice. It's a scale unit which you can place somewhere else, but it has so many operations, so it's a set of microservices, you could call it. But
it's also important to know that the scale units actually solve a different problem.
Exactly.
They don't solve the maintainability problem.
No.
They solve latency problems. If you have a store or a warehouse in a different Azure region, it solves that problem.
Yeah.
It also solves as you said, the offline problem, that when we do maintenance in finance and operations, we don't need to we can still do most of the work, even though the main system is down at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So two different things, basically. Microservices. Then we have, of course, it's like other applications that are like out of the box integrated to Dynamics that are not scale units. So we're going to go through a number of these, and I think the examples will make it even more clear. But it's interesting to see the transitioning from Microsoft side to more and more microservices. Like I said a couple of years back, everyone wanted to solve every problem with a microservice. That's not always the best the best path to go. Don't build a microservice just because you can. But if you, there are a number of functions where a microservice makes a lot of sense, and we have some of them here on the dynamic side as well.
Yeah, and there are other reasons for using this architecture. So the one we mentioned was maintainability, of course. The second one is scalability, because when we are in a sort of a cloud environment, we have situations where we would like to be able to scale things out and scale things up, because we are putting a bigger load on the system. We would like to be able to scale things out. And if our microservices is built in the correct way, and with correct way, what I'm saying is basically we need to understand where our state is stored. What is expendable and what needs to be saved. We don't want to have these microservices store a lot of state. We want them to be sort of just code. Yeah. We want them to be a place where we send things. We have metadata there, but the actual data is not there. We have maybe a rule set. We have endpoints. It's an integration platform. It could be. But we don't want, if it goes down, if it crashes, we don't want to lose any data, because that's another place where we need to do backups, and that means that we have more complexity in this. But as you're saying here, the microservices, as well as simplifying things in one way, it also creates a complexity, because there are more things that we need to understand, but they are also more well-defined. We can also maintain them in a better way and making it easier in the long run. So I still think it's a better solution, but we need to understand it in a broader way.
Broader context, yeah, exactly. And I mean, just by running Dynamics 365 on Azure, you're using like microservices components and architecture, whether you like it or not. I mean, you have a number of like operations executing on the platform in itself that you could argue are microservices. But what we're going to cover here in this discussion is mainly the business operations, the ones that solve or try to resolve at least business operations for you in a nicer way.
Yeah. So the question here is Gustav has touched on it before. Is this a new approach? No, it's not, because we have done this, for instance, when we implemented BizTalk. BizTalk is a dedicated integration environment where we actually moved the integration logic and code out of the system. So we're moving it into a centralized store where we're just keeping the integrations. That's one example. ERP and CRM is another example where we break things apart, and because we used to have like a CRM component in AX.
Still do in some cases, yeah.
I mean, the reason why we're doing this, and also if you look at CRM, that we're breaking CRM apart, is that we are creating smaller logical parts, which is more easier to maintain and handle. If we look at the component that used to be Dynamics 365 for talent, that's an example of this. We took the HR module out of a finance and operations into a different component, into different applications. Unfortunately, it didn't work, so now it's back again. We are using the old one as well. And I would still, I mean, from some point, even though it is not the microservice, you could actually argue that the retail setup in AX 2012 was sort of a way to break things apart and make things less vulnerable, but it doesn't solve exactly the same problem. So you could argue both sides.
It's a scale unit, right? I mean, this 2012 retail is exactly the same. It's just it's cloud scale unit and a lot of new cool components, of course. But it's the same principle here. It's not a microservice in itself. You do lose data if the cloud scale unit goes down and you haven't replicated it back to your backend. So, but it is to say, like I said, maybe like three things here. Scale unit is one thing. Microservice is another. And like interconnected applications would be a third. That's not a trademarked saying here, but no. You get what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. So which microservices are available? So the one that we are referring to as microservices today in this context are the ones that you can install as add-ins in LCS. We have one that is a bit out of scope here, but we will mention it as well because it fulfill the same sort of design character of a microservice. But what we are talking about normally is the one that we install from LCS that is called an add-in. So I will start with the first one, and this one is sort of the one that I think is the most important one right now, because it's basically not a service that the users will be using. It's an infrastructure, and that is export to data lake. It's been in preview for a really long time, and right now it's in sort of a limbo. It's in preview still sort of for the near real-time synchronization. The reason for this is that you will require to have the data lake setup done for some of the other microservices that we will be discussing in this episode. So it's an important one, and it's the one that is closest to I wouldn't say that it's closest to GA, but it's one of the ones that are more or less done. I've been in fast track projects where even the fast track architects say that you can use this. It's fine. Yeah. You can even use the near real time synchronization part because it is working. It has been tested. It just doesn't have the GA stamp, so you will be supported as if you are in GA.
Yeah,
sort of.
It's near GA. As near as you can get,
exactly.
Right? It was one component.
Yes.
But exactly. But again, this goes back to what we discussed before, with platform components being of a microservices nature, of course, because you're talking to Azure Synapse, you're talking to all these functions, and they are in turn connecting to the low-level SQL side, which you're not accessing from Dynamics. So you are leveraging on a number of microservices here, but the add-in in itself that we discuss here is like the microservice that you need to install. So
yeah. So important thing to note here is that it's doing a couple of things. It's exporting data out to a data lake. And the reason for that is that we used to have two ways of exporting data, or actually providing data for especially for reporting. The first one was bring your own database, which exported to an Azure SQL. The second one is the database internally in the F&O environment called AXDW, AX Data Warehouse. Those are eventually going away. Not at the moment, but they are eventually being deprecated and replaced by the data lake. And the reason for this is, of course, that it has a lot cheaper storage. Azure SQL is not a cheap solution by any means. And and it's also, as I said, it's also going to be infrastructure for a lot of other services that we are eventually going to have.
Yeah.
And then we have I would say the oldest one. The oldest microservice of all, the mother of all microservices.
Yeah, this is a stretch calling it a microservices. Well, it is in all essence a microservice because it takes us like a long running batch operation from legacy side. The master planning has always been like the biggest culprit of performance or issues because it's so complicated to plan, right? So what it is, it's basically offsetting that set of operations that plans and optimizes your master planning based on your demand and order, etc. Instead of running it in a batch nightly, as is the norm, you put this set of operation out to the planning optimization tool, which is which is optimized for that specific. It doesn't run on X++. It doesn't run. It's optimized to do this set of operations, and then it returns back the result. So from that perspective, it's a perfect microservice. It's just usually a lot of data. So it works with the data stream, and then performs the calculations based on your setup, etc. And actually, this one, if you're using master planning, this is not like an optional one. You need to start planning for this because the old solution within Dynamics will be deprecated soon.
It was deprecated in December 2020.
Yeah, but I mean,
so it's not even so. I would say that most of the microservices will probably end up in the same place as planning optimizations, replacing something else, moving something else out of the system, deprecating the old version and being the new shiny thing.
Exactly, but it's always going to be like a transition period, right? So if you're stuck in the old one, you need to stay on top of when it is like finally shut down. Deprecated means that you can still use it for a while, but it will go out. So you need to make sure to use it, start using it at least.
Yes. Okay, so the next one is actually one that's called IoT Intelligence. And I would say that this is also one of those infrastructure ones. So what it actually does, it integrates F&O with the Azure IoT Event Hub. So it's basically just the glue between F&O and IoT services in Azure. Okay, so why would you want this? So the reason here is that it creates a no-code abstraction between F&O and IoT services in Azure, meaning that you don't need to build the connection to Azure. And it also surfaces data from the IoT Event Hub directly into Azure. You have basically 3 scenarios today. You have delayed orders, you have equipment down, and you have quality anomaly. And that you can use those as indicators to create rules which apply to, for instance, delivery times and such.
And again, like a set of operations to that connect to existing external components. But interface design makes it so that you don't have to build this on your own. You can rely on the standard set of components and then do what you like with it, but you don't need to build the actual connection. So that's a very nice thing. And speaking of nice things, the tax calculation service is a really nice thing. And this is my favorite one from this discussion because it's so clearly a microservice that fits all of the criteria here, where you can instead of running the calculation of tax based on like tax code and a lot of different criteria, depending on which country you're in, the tax calculation can become quite complex in different scenarios. I think for just a side note here, I think specifically India, based on experience at least, has been the most complex one when it comes to tax calculation. They spent, it must have been thousands and thousands of development hours building tax calculation to adhere to those complex scenarios between regions. And then they changed it to flat tax instead. And then they had to change, put thousands of new development hours to roll back those changes. So with that said, offsetting that complex set of logical rules and operations that is tax, that is also prone to change, changing the VAT percentage from a yearly basis, a number of changes coming in. So instead of doing it within the ERP machine, you put this operation out and you just pass the agreed upon contract, like VAT code, group, customer, whatever you need. It returns back the calculated tax value, and you can change the rule set with which it calculates without impacting ERP. Without you get all of the benefits here from a microservice, and this is really a micro because that's what it does. It doesn't do anything else. It just runs that tax. I don't know about data retention here, but I would assume that it only stores data temporary when doing calculations, so only instantiate data and then it drops it, I would guess, from a maintenance perspective. I would hope, at least.
Yes, a few notes. It's available in Asia, Australia, Canada, Europe, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States. So it is usable in most regions right now. And one thing that you need to know is that if you haven't set up RCS yet, the RCS is the electronic reporting repository that replaced LCS a while ago. If you haven't set it up yet, this is a requirement for running the tax calculation service. So that needs to be in place.
Yes, and this might also mean, I don't think that's the case, but it might mean that your tax calculation queries are passed to another data center than the one in which your Dynamics application resides. Another thing to think about when you set this up. Performance, etc. Maybe regulatory constraints as well. So something to think about when designing microservices as well as scenarios. Finance insights, Johan, and reporting, right?
Yes, this is actually one of my favorites, and it's probably not for the reason that you think. The whole point of Finance Insights is actually to calculate cash flow, and that is done based on an AI model, which predicts based on previous payment history. It predicts cash flow for specific customers. So it actually warns you which customers is more or less likely to pay on time. And it can also create snapshots. So you can actually compare the guess that the model is making and compare that to what is the actual scenario in most cases. And you can also like track cash position and cash forecasts over time. So it doesn't just show you what is the instance right now. It actually shows you what it used to be. You can create a snapshot at the start of the month, and then see if it has changed its predictions and so on. And the reason for me thinking that this one is the best one is not because I'm all of a sudden being interested in finance. It's because actually it's a way to trick customers to start using AI. Because the thing is that we have a lot of AI features in Azure. The problem is that you need to be like a data scientist to use them. You need to have a lot of understanding of AI. Then Microsoft released AI Builder, because that was going to be extremely simple. The problem is that it's still not extremely simple. You still have to understand how a learning model works. Yeah. So in this case, it actually uses AI Builder, but it's a really, really, really constrained model, which the user can't really touch. It's pre-built, it's pre-trained, and it's out of reach for anyone using the system. Yeah. So it basically just gives you a result back, and you don't even have to understand that this is AI working.
No. It makes a lot of sense to do that because it's so standable with the result, right? And a lot of people do this already with replenishment scenarios and algorithms that you trust. You don't understand them if you're not a very advanced mathematician, but you trust that they do their work, and you actually see the results because it's measurable how many clients you can, or how many credit or claims you need to handle anyway. So it's really cool.
The next one is expense management. And that is also a service that's actually tricking people into using AI. And the reason for that is that what it does is that it scans receipts, and then it matches them to the expenses that you have reported. And it can also like scan the statements from credit card companies and match them automatically to expenses filed in the system. The only problem is that it only works in the US, which is a shame. So eventually it will probably end up here, but it will require cooperation with the major credit card vendors also. So it might be that it takes some time.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
With payroll as well, right? Still only applicable in US, I believe. Right, you can also take the next one, the electronic invoicing, right? I think that's another one you know more than I do.
Yeah, so I've discussed this a couple of times on the podcast before, that we spend a lot of time and money in the project building things that is extremely static. For instance, invoicing and getting invoices from governments, for instance, is one of those. It's not like governments are known for changing their standards that often. So having Microsoft build these templates and set up is probably a good thing, because it makes it gives us a chance to focus on other things in the project and other things that we need to fix. So the whole point here is that it requires RCS, as did tax calculation service. It has multiple formats like electronic electronic reporting, and the whole point is that you actually connect it directly to the web services endpoints of the receivers of the invoices. So you don't even have to have like a service sending them to the correct place.
No.
It gets sent automatically, which is a really cool thing.
Yeah. It's like an EDI broker, basically. It's a really cool thing. All right. Another one that we have is the inventory visibility app. Kind of falls a little bit in between because it's a really microservice, pretty clear-cut case. Like you have on-hand queries going to another application, in this case, the visibility app, instead of being routed towards the ERP or backend here for performance reasons, scalability. But visibility tries to solve not only the performance part, it also ends up being like a global repository of on-hand, because you might have more than one sources of on-hand globally than just Dynamics 365 ERP. So what it is an application which just resides in Dataverse and relies on Dataverse and actual data storage. So it's not clear-cut microservice. It does store data, and but you don't, except for the rule in the setup, if you lose data, the data is always fed from the source systems, Dynamics being one, like plug-and-play provider, but you can configure any ERP or any channel, basically, to update the inventory visibility app with current on-hand data. It also handles available to promise. It handles reservations, etc. So you can have the point of it is to try have a near real-time, accurate on-hand visibility globally, without having to do all of those merge operations within ERP. So a little bit, mainly a microservice, but it also works on its own, basically. You could theoretically run this without Dynamics 365 as a backend, but it's a clear case because it comes as an add-in for it.
Yes. And then we have a brand new one, actually,
yeah,
which is global inventory accounting.
Yeah, I can talk about that one as well. I haven't had a chance to test this one out because it's a really, what it does is if you have, let's say you have standard cost as your inventory value model, you're quite happy with it. It's easy and simple to understand. Unfortunately, it doesn't match the requirements for some legal reasons. I'm not an expert here, but there is a need to run double or dual valuations. Maybe you might run standard cost. What this does, it's kind of offsets that set of operations to an external application where it can calculate, let's say, FIFO or moving average. It can run a different inventory value model, or like having a different currency. It's for reporting purposes. It's for regulatory purposes, that you might have a set of rules that require your business to operate in a certain way here, but you have a legal need to report in a different way over here. So that's what this aims to resolve here. Not from a performance perspective, because it's not possible to do it within Dynamics without heavy customization. So this resolves an actual operational problem for some companies, and arguably, and it does it as like an external service, I would say, rather than microservice, because it's more of a finance insights, I would say. You export data and it runs a set of operations on it, but you extract the data from there. It doesn't push it back to Dynamics or anything like that. It's a reporting tool application.
Yes, and then we have the one that we mentioned briefly in the beginning that is sort of in a gray area, but I would say that it still fits.
Yeah, it qualifies. Yeah,
the definition of microservice, even though it's not an add-in.
No, exactly. It's the IOM, the Intelligent Order Management. It's branded, I'm not a full expert here, but it's branded as a separate application. So you can license this separately as well as the visibility, I believe. It's an order management application, really. But again, it falls in the category of Dynamics because it's an add-in and it comes plug and play with Dynamics as a source of order management or orders. But it also comes with a number of other players where out-of-the-box connectivity, and you can extend upon it. It connects to the inventory visibility app as well. So again, it tries to pull that kind of complex calculation for order management with fulfillment calculations and criteria, where you can define, you kind of build these rules it runs on Dataverse, and you can build these like rules outside, and then it has this configurations or connectors to Dynamics, where it pulls all of the relevant data and then calculates based on that. So it's more of a larger set of operations that you push out outside of Dynamics because you have a need to connect to different sources. But it kind of falls in the microservice category as well. At least it is an add-in that you need to activate, right? So a larger set of operations than a pure microservice. But the actual the order execution is then done in the corresponding systems. So it builds and returns a set, okay, these orders should be fulfilled. And then they are actually fulfilled within the ERP. So it's still just a set of calculations that are then acted upon. That's why we put it on the list. It qualifies.
All right. So I think we are actually done for today.
Yeah, those are the add-ins that we have, right?
Yep. I think we've given you a sort of an overview of the add-ins and also a discussion around why these exist. I think personally, I think it's a good way that Microsoft is going. I think the lesser things that we can do within finance and operations, the more we can add, we can use the power of the ERP system for what it's actually good at.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good idea.
I think that's very good. I think what you said before as well, the whole point of if you're doing something, let's try to solve a problem here. And all of these are actually trying to solve a problem, be it of performance or scalability or actually just putting a set of operations that you normally have multiple sources for, etc. It's solving an issue. And it helps relieve the amount of customizations that you need to put into your ERP, which is more rigid and slow moving than many of these applications need to be. All right.
All right. So thank you for this one. And have a nice summer if we don't hear from you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.